and also he claims that apostasy is punishable with death. Now, we're very lucky to be joined by our legal correspondent, Qudsi Rashid, to help us to look in depth at Islamic law and see whether or not these statements are in fact correct. Thank you for joining us, Qudsi. And the first question, Qudsi, is to do with human rights. And does Islam actually support the concept of human rights?
Jazakallah, Hamad. Of course it does. I think there's no question about that. And a simple and brief overview of the principles of Islam would show this. Islam, just like every revealed religion that preceded it, emphasizes the importance of the respect and duties towards all of God's creatures. That particular relationship embeds human rights into the very fabric and core of Islam. If you look at the rights that are contained, for example, in modern-day international law, Islam respects those rights exactly. The right to life, liberty, the rights of persons and property, the right to freedom of religion and conscience, equality and non-discrimination, all these principles are rooted within Islam's teachings. And the interesting thing is that these rights that are now recognized in modern international law have only been around in the international domain for about 60 or 70 years since the end of the Second World War in 1945, whereas these very same rights have been there, found in the Holy Quran over 1400 years ago. And rights that are still being fought for today in many parts of the world are also there to be found within Islam. Socio-economic rights, for example, which are still being fought for in countries like the United States, the right to welfare and food and an adequate standard of living, these are all there in Islam, as are environmental rights and rights for animals. All of these rights are there contained in Islam.
Many people think that Islam is incompatible with the idea of freedom of religion, that Islam doesn't allow people to practice their own conscience as far as religion is concerned. But is this true?
Most certainly isn't true, Dr. Khan. In Islam, the right to practice one's own religion is definitely protected. In the Holy Quran, for example, it says in chapter 2, verse 257, "There is no compulsion in religion. Surely the right way has become manifest from error." What can clearly be seen from this verse is that the right to choose one's own path is there left up to the individual choice. Dr. Jones talks about the fact that in Islam there is no concept of moral agency or of individual's choice. What this verse clearly shows is the complete opposite. It allows people to choose what is right for them. It goes on in the Quran and says in chapter 10, verse 100, and it asks rhetorically, "Wilt thou then force people to become believers?" This rhetorical device shows the fact that matters of belief, matters of religion, they're all matters of the heart and the soul. These are not things that can be enforced by the sword or by any method of force. And so people are left up to their own judgment. And in Surah Al-Kafirun, chapter 109 of the Holy Quran, it says, "Say, O ye who disbelieve, I worship not as you worship, nor do you worship as I worship. Nor do I worship that which you worship, nor do you worship him whom I worship. For you, your religion, and for me, my religion. What better evidence can there be of freedom of religion? For you, your religion, and for me, my religion."
Thank you. And finally, many people in the West, even some Muslims, believe that Islam is not compatible with democracy, with the idea of democracy. But does Islam allow for democracy?
It most certainly does. What we can see from the principles of Islam when it comes to democracy is that Islam does not enforce or particularly mandate any specific form of administration or governance. It sets forth a basic principle on how people should be governed. It says in the Holy Quran, "God commands you to entrust the responsibility of government to those worthy of it, and those of you who become rulers should rule justly." This is in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 59. What we can see here are two basic principles. The first shows that the sovereignty is the sovereignty vested in the people. It's talked about as a trust, that actually the sovereignty does not lie within the ruler, but it lies within the people, and that the power to rule proceeds not from the sovereign to the ruled, but rather from the people to the sovereign. And what the responsibility of those people is to entrust that power among those people who are able to rule justly. And that leads to the second principle, that people who are ruling should rule along the principles of justice, equity, and respecting the rights of other people. So you could have a caliph, you could have a representative government, you could have an elected council, you could have various forms of government, but as long as they have the democratically mandated right from the people, the sovereignty of the people have been given to them, and they rule with justice and equity and according to those principles, then those are all consistent with Islam. And Islam goes on to say, and this is in the Quran as well itself, is that whatever authority there is over you, that is what you have a loyalty to obey and a duty to obey.
Thank you, Qudsi Sahib. Now back to this final point that Dr. Terry Jones has made about the idea of apostasy in Islam. And this is probably an idea that is quite widespread within the Muslim world as well, the idea that apostasy, the punishment for apostasy, the punishment for someone who leaves Islam is death. But where has this idea come from?
Well, it's come from the Bible. This does not appear anywhere in the Quran. The Quran has given total freedom of religion. On the other hand, we see that in the Bible, for people who go against the commandments of God and who move away from them, they're stoned. Stoning is advocated by the Bible, not by the Quran. And it's good that you said that there are many Muslims, that you pointed this out here, that there are many Muslims who are under the impression that the apostate has to be put to death. So nobody has the right to leave Islam. Once they're in there, they're welcome to come in, but not to go to leave, to go out. This is mostly because of some really, medieval-minded clerics, especially present-day ones who've written extensively on this subject. In particular, Maulana Abul Ala Maududi, whose writings have been translated into all the main Islamic languages. He writes in Murtad Ki Saza Islami Qanun Mein, which is an Urdu book, which is available in Arabic, as I said, in other languages as well. He writes, "In our domain, we neither allow any Muslim to change his religion, nor allow any other religion to propagate its faith." So a very bleak picture indeed he's painting here, and this is taken to be the sacred message of the Quran by many Muslims today.
So what is the reality, though? I mean, if you're saying that this isn't true, that the likes of Maulana Maududi are propagating a false idea of the punishment for apostasy, what's the reality? What is the punishment for apostasy?
Well, for me, the thing is, I don't believe the ordinary common sense Muslim, if you want to put it that way, who wants to live their life in accordance to Islam. The fact is, it would seem that these people are not even reading the Quran, because in the Quran Allah says, "La ikraha fi ad-din," there is no compulsion in religion. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything other that we cannot compel you, we cannot force you to stay or to leave. It is purely up to you.
So actually that means there is no punishment for apostasy at all?
Absolutely none.
Absolutely. Moving on to the last 2 points that Terry Jones makes is about essentially the interface between Islam and the West. And his first statement is that he believes that deep in Islamic teaching and culture is a hatred and a loathing of the West. And I suppose for perhaps some Westerners who don't have a knowledge of Islam, they might think that that's true, that Muslims hate the West. And the reason that they hate it is because Islam tells them to hate it.
The most you can say is that people among the Muslims who've had their countries invaded, who've had their homes attacked, their loved ones killed by people from the West, those people might have a grudge against Westerners as such, or the West as such as one big block, maybe. But the thing is, there is not this deep-seated fear of the West or hatred towards the West at all. Not at all. Islam turned its face, as from the very beginning of its inception, towards the West, as it's a religion for all mankind. And indeed, a lot of people in the West accepted Islam right into the depths of Europe.
I mean, it's just whatever people are pushing into their minds, it doesn't necessarily exist. Of course, yes, you can understand. There is certain situations which has nothing to do with Islam. It's, if anything, it's culturally based. It is something children are fed in from a very young age from one family, and then...
And this is Muslim clerics, usually. You'll see not only Muslim clerics, but clerics of any religion which are extreme, in the extreme forms of those religions, I mean. You'll see them breeding hatred in their speeches, in their places of
we
worship. We do see
extremists in certain countries, don't we?
And we see them in Christians as well, in America in particular.
Well, it's
the same
on both sides. Yeah.
Sometimes if you just swap over the faces and just change the words slightly in the speeches, it could have been made by how would I say, an extremist rabbi in Israel. It could have been made just as well by an extremist mullah in Pakistan, or it could have been made by a Bible thumper in America. It's the same discourse. It's hatred. And hatred is from Satan. Satan wants to divide us. Satan wants to separate us from each other, and that we do not love each other. We hope that Dr. Terry Jones will now read the Quran, and then maybe he might slightly, hopefully, change his views on what he's said.
Gain more understanding about what Islam really stands for from that point of view.
Yeah.
The final point that he makes is that he believes essentially that Islam is a political tool. And he says Islam is a weapon of Arab colonialism, and he says Islamic colonialism, and he says that wherever Islam has made gains in political power, then the people of other religions suffer. So Christians, Jews, all non-Muslims, essentially, they suffer, they're persecuted.
Well, that's quite, I think that's quite fresh coming from a Christian, where we know, and we do not as Muslims condemn neither Christ nor Christianity for what I'm about to say now, but he's talking about Christian and other communities suffering under so-called Muslim colonialism, whereas Christianity was used as a tool of colonialism for centuries. Absolutely. And they didn't only make people suffer. Those Christians who went there, they wiped them out. They've been obliterated. Hundreds and hundreds of languages, cultures, peoples have gone forever. They're not there anymore. But do we blame Christ and Christianity for that? No.
And he also mentions this idea of forced conversions and sort of violence against those people. And I suppose that comes into the idea of a violent jihad, this misconception of a violent jihad. And I mean, this idea has been around for a very long time, as we know, and is even promoted by some extremist Muslims, and certainly is promoted by certain people in the West. This idea is pushed that Islam promotes violent jihad and is all about violent jihad. In fact, they only, in fact, Terry Jones, almost his thesis is that jihad and the suppression of other people is what Islam is all about. But there's a certain reality there that jihad, in that sense, doesn't really make any sense from the point of view of Islamic teaching.
Doesn't make sense at all from the point of view of Islamic teaching. As we had said earlier, jihad is a struggle for peace, for truth, and for protection of life, property, and honor. And this is what jihad is: it's self-defense. That's all it is. So the West, the populations living in the West, they have to wake up to reality. Are they going to keep on swallowing wholesale whatever these so-called specialists throw at them? That, we've seen it all, Islam is this and Islam is that. But by the way, we haven't even read the Quran, we haven't even gone to see what Sharia is about, we haven't gone to see the history of Islam, but we're telling you it's evil. How long are they going to stay asleep and let this discourse of hatred divide us like this?
Absolutely.
It has to stop.
I remember once in Hyde Park, after I became Muslim, there was a Texan minister who was preaching hatred towards Islam. And I and others who met with him, and obviously we had long weeks of discussion. And just by meeting us, myself and others, he was getting a different image of Islam. Actually, when he disappeared for about a month, and after a month when he came back, I asked him that where was he? He said, just come back from Jerusalem. He actually pulled me aside, and he said to me, I have to admit, and he was whispering this to me, he said, I have to admit, I have never met such more moral, peaceful, kind, loving people than I've met in the Muslims I've met in Jerusalem. And I pulled him aside and I said to him, why do you think that is? Why do you think they were acting like this? They can only be acting like this because this is what they follow. They follow the teachings of Quran. They follow the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And he had no other thing but to say, you're correct. So it means people like Dr. Terry Jones need to really take some time out, maybe sit with some Muslims, maybe even go to some Muslim countries and sit there, and I can guarantee you he'll come back with a different story. That's what he's not done.
I think that now we've come to the end of these 10 points, the 10 accusations that Dr. Terry Jones makes against the Quran, makes against the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and against Islam. And I think what we've